Okay, so we've just observed that functions are objects and two names can point to the same function object. We have also seen that a function can accept another function as an argument. We are now going to learn about closures, which will help us when learning about decorators. But before getting into what a closure is, we have to first recap what a nested function and a non-local variable is. I'm confident you will know what these are already based on learnings earlier in the course, but let's recap for good measure. Now, a function defined inside of another function is called a nested function, which we saw in the prior video. Now, when it comes to nested functions, they can access variables of what is known as the enclosing scope, and we've also touched upon scope in an earlier video. Let's see an example of a nested function accessing a non-local variable. So if we create a function called greeting and inside of parentheses pass in a parameter called message and then put a colon, the body of the function that we define with one indentation would be what is known as the outer enclosing function. Now if I was to now define another function, so let's put def welcome with a set of parentheses and a colon, this is then what is regarded as the nested function, i.e. we have a function nested inside of another function. So let's have it so that the welcome function simply prints out what is passed in as message. Now notice here that message is passed in to the outer enclosing function, and we're looking to access this in the welcome function without passing it in as a parameter. What we can then do is have the greeting function call upon the welcome function. If we now execute the greeting function and pass in the argument hello into the message parameter, you can see that we print to the screen hello. So this example clearly demonstrates that the nested function is able to access the non-local variable, in this case message because it's defined above, of the enclosing function. We haven't had to stipulate message in the welcome function, we've stipulated it in the outer enclosing function. Okay, so that's the first thing to note. Now what would happen if the last line of the greeting function where we've called upon welcome returned the welcome function instead of calling it? So let's copy and paste this code cell, and where we've called welcome, let's simply return the name welcome, which we know is bound to a function object. In other words, we don't need to put parentheses when we return this function. If I now create a new variable called new_name and set this equal to a call on the greeting function in which we pass in the string hello, because we are now returning the welcome function when the greeting function is called, we know new_name will be an object of the type function. And just to prove this, if we pass new_name into the built-in type function, we do indeed get function returned. So if I now call new_name with a set of parentheses, because we can call functions, we get hello printed to the screen. Now does that seem strange to you? What's happening here is we're calling the greeting function and passing in a parameter. Now the greeting function actually returns a different function called welcome, which doesn't take in any parameter, and the new_name variable now has the welcome function bound to it. But when we then call new_name, the input of hello that we passed into the greeting function was remembered based on what we'd put in previously. Now this technique by which some data, and in this case it's the string hello that we've passed into the greeting function, the technique by which this gets attached to the code is called closure in Python. In other words, the value in the enclosing scope, so the hello string that we pass into the greeting function, is remembered even when the variable itself goes out of scope or the function itself is removed from the current namespace. And to show you what I mean in another example, let's now delete the greeting function. So if I put del greeting and then try to call upon the greeting function and pass in hello, we run into a name error telling us that the name greeting is not defined. But what if I tried to execute new_name, which was previously bound to a call on the greeting function, which we know returned the welcome function? But when I do this, we still print out the word hello. So the return function still works even when the original function, in this case greeting, is deleted. So this is something else to keep in mind, as it's useful when covering the concept of decorators. Okay, so just to recap, we have a closure in Python when a nested function, in this example the welcome function, references a value in its enclosing scope, with this example's value being the message variable. To create a closure in Python, we must have a nested function, in this example tick, welcome is nested. The nested function must refer to a value defined in the enclosing function, tick, we can see here we're printing message, which is defined in the greeting function. And finally, the enclosing function must return the nested function, which it is doing in this example, it's returning welcome. In the next video, we'll continue our discussion on closures and observe when closures are good to use. So I'll see you in the next video.